I believe genius isn't only certain people are born with. You have to find your genius. Like in your case, it could be playing the guitar, right? So in other people, it could be cooking. In other people, it could be taking care of the elderly.
You're listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a T. Torrance Productions original podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Kurt Newman. This is the Staring at the World podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Patrick K. Porter, PhD, and really interesting stuff he's working on, the science between meditation and sounds and kind of aligning your brain waves. I found it just fascinating. I hope you guys will like it as well. Here's my interview with Dr. Patrick K. Porter. Today we're joined by a very interesting guest. I was really looking forward to talking to you about what you're doing. Our guest is Dr. Patrick K. Porter, who is a founder of the company called BrainTap. And he is also an award-winning author, educator, researcher, entrepreneur, and speaker. You have a Lifetime Achievement Award. This is tricky for me. Interdisciplinary Association of Functional Neuroscience and Rehabilitation. That's a mouthful for me, but it's pretty impressive. You're also the Dean of Mind-Based Studies at the International Quantum University of Integrative Medicine. Big words for me, playing rock guitar, but I read about what you're doing and watched some of your videos online, and I was really, really impressed with what you're doing. For those who don't know about BrainTap, he's basically dealing with guided meditation and science kind of coming together to help you align your brain waves and lead kind of a less stressful, more peaceful, peace of mind type life. And I think it'll be really interesting for people to hear about what you're doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dr. Patrick K. Porter, our guest today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
It's great. Before we get into all the science, I really like to start with talking to my guests about kind of where they came from as growing up and what kind of brought them to where they were, because this podcast I'm dealing with the creative stuff that people do in their lives. I always approached everything from a really creative mind instead of logical necessarily. And for me, that seemed logical. But can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and some of what your life was like and growing up and kind of what kind of brought you in this direction?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan, the cereal city, and that's where the very first health food store in the world was, because Dr. Kellogg started that revolution. So my mother got involved with that for us. There were 9 kids in my family. So wow. When we came in, it was like a tornado. So she got us all off of white sugar, white flour. And then my dad at the same time was getting a master's degree in alcoholism. He was the world's greatest alcoholic. And so he got help doing something called the Silva method, which is a technology-driven meditation. And he liked it so much, he said, hey, this is good enough for my family. So he became the southwestern region trainer. He was what they called the silver instructor. He's one of the first instructors in the world. There's still millions of people doing that program, but I grew up with it on brain machines. I was an artist, actually had art scholarships growing up, but I wasn't very good in school. So I attended second grade. I failed second grade the first time, went back and was really struggling in school until I started using this technology. And that was kind of my upbringing. I became, pretty proficient in learning. I'm an honor roll student, 3-sport captain, and I attribute it all to starting to use my mind and my brain and just changing my attitude. I was a very negative kid until then, blamed the world for my position instead of looking inside and seeing I was the biggest. My dad used to say, what's the common denominator? And when I finally realized that I was the common denominator, I changed my life. And then in the 80s, I was part of the team that invented this space. There was nobody doing this. We took a big piece of equipment which was manually driven and made the first portable light and sound machine. It was called MC Square because I really love Einstein. So
Yeah.
most of my stuff is kind of like that.
Yeah. Me too. It's interesting. I wanted to ask you, like, where was a point where you really, like, kind of what age were you at where you really made that jump between, just a kid searching, in trouble, not doing great in school? You found this, but what point did you kind of make that leap of, I'm really into this, this really, your intuition is kind of leading you down a path of, this feels right for me to do this. Was it at a younger age or a teenage or whereabouts in your life?
Yeah. I produced my very first cassette with my affirmations on it when I was 12. And actually my Christmas present I asked for and I got was an alarm clock that woke you up to your cassette, for those who remember cassettes. And so I woke up every morning, I'd lay in bed and listen to my affirmations. And that was at 12. And I think that's when I really started to really believe this, because I started actually seeing the result in baseball and in other sports.
Yeah, like, I can imagine being 12 years old at that age, there was not kids around you like doing that activity at all.
No, we were considered really weird. I mean, they actually said that I would replace Yule Gibbons in the Grape Nuts commercials. For those who remember Yule Gibbons, because I ate really healthy, I didn't need a school lunch. I brought my own food, and because I believe there's 3 phases to wellness. You can't outthink a bad diet. So you have to have that, you have to eat right. You got to move and breathe, like do yoga, Tai Chi, or dance. Get up and do something, don't just sit on your keister all day. And then number 3 is do something to keep your brain fit. Because if you're not doing something to keep your brain fit, and that has to do with recovery. In America, we're driven to succeed, but sometimes people drive so hard in their business life that when they retire, they expire because they never took the time to really have that balanced life of recovery. So I think that's the key, is having those 3 phases in your life and working through them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I really struggle with that myself of, a lot of stress. When you have your own business of any type, there's millions of people who can relate to that, of it's just you got everything on you all the time. And so you're always having to deal with different stresses all the time. And it's really hard to find that balance point. It's something since I was about 30 years old, I've been trying to find a balance between like enjoyment or exercise and then, your work, what you have to do. And you bring up a really interesting point when you were talking about your dad saying what was the common denominator, and you're kind of saying your perspective is everything on that. And I really agree with what you're saying there. Is like you got to have the right mindset to make those changes. But was there anything you can point to in your childhood that was saying like your parents were just kind of really accepting of saying like, we understand, Patrick, going this direction, this makes sense to us too? Did they say this is great, or did they say you need to get a real job or anything like that?
Well, actually, I went to school first for electronics. I wasn't going to do the family business, as it were, but I kept helping my dad out with his seminars and enjoying it so much. And then I had a chance to either go further into electronics or do my own thing. And I chose doing my own thing. And that's because I really one of the things I love to do is get out there and educate people, because I believe my first book was called Awaken the Genius, because I believe genius isn't only certain people are born with. You have to find your genius. Like in your case, it could be playing the guitar, right? So in other people, it could be cooking. In other people, it could be taking care of the elderly. It doesn't, whatever your talents and skills bring you to. And for me, it seemed like therapy became my tool. And so I started a franchise company. I sold that in 2006, but I had it up to 108 locations and was teaching people my philosophies, and through clinics, helping people with things like stress disorders, weight loss, stop smoking, addictions, and things like that. And I just found that was very gratifying to, I like the feedback, being out there with people. I still like to get up and speak in front of groups, just to see the light bulbs go off and explain, taking complex information, I think making it simpler. Sometimes I do still talk too much like a doctor, but we need to, I think now everyone understands when you go to the grocery store, there's brains on at least half the book covers, right? On the magazine covers. So people are starting to get that, one statistic that I just heard that was kind of frightening for me. Half of the people who've ever made it to the age 65 or older, half those people in the history of the world are alive today. So we haven't even had that many people live to be 65 or older.
Right.
So we're talking about how do we deal with it? The aging brain, I believe the brain can stay youthful and young at any age. And so that's now my new mission, is to help people understand dementia. It's more than just a hereditary thing. It's a lifestyle thing. And there are specific things you can do to reverse it. And I'm convinced of that because we've done studies that prove it. So that's my mission now, is to tell people that you don't have to grow old and lose your memory. When you look at ancient cultures, they didn't turn over the wisdom of the tribe to the young people. They gave it to the elders. So what were they doing differently than we're doing today? Part of it was they had better recovery. They slept deeper, they slept longer.
Yeah.
Then there's a series of other things people would do, but that was part of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're talking about is almost something I felt when I was young too, of this intuition just nagged at me. It was such a strong, overwhelming feeling about what I wanted to do, but compared to what you think you're supposed to do. I was never one of those kids who fit in. One of the things you said in your story that I connected to right away was when you talked about the alcoholic father. My dad ended up drinking himself to death, and there was always a lot of drinking in my household and stuff. And yet at 15 years old, I decided I didn't want to eat red meat anymore, and slowly but surely even gotten to, by 30, I was eating a macrobiotic diet and stuff, not because anyone around me was or anyone told me to. It was just I had this gut kind of feeling about it. And I think a lot of what you're talking about too is that sort of thing when it comes to the brain. Listening to what's going on there in your being, your core, wherever it is, like that. But you also have the advantage of studying this scientifically. So you've seen results. And I can remember when I was a teen first hearing about meditation, the links that science was putting together with meditation were pretty incredible. And now you've spent a long time studying this sort of thing in the lab yourself, right?
Yeah, well, back in the 80s, you could actually buy a piece of equipment called a GSR machine. You can actually still buy those online, and they're about $150. And you can train yourself to go to these brain states like alpha. And there's what most people don't know is that the neurotransmitters, these are the things that make us feel good or feel bad, they're triggered by these different brain waves. So what meditation does more than anything else, it triggers our gut, because the gut is the biggest part of our immune system and also our brain. We have a gut brain, and it makes all those neurotransmitters. So when you're in these different brain states, like in the alpha, which is where most people go when they meditate, then you start to create something called acetylcholine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter. So people who meditate just feel better, and you get energy. I believe we live in an energy economy. And most people are doing things that rob their body of energy, like eating red meat a lot. I mean, I'm not a strict vegetarian, but if I eat red meat once a week, that's probably not happening. I try not to, because I don't feel good when I'm eating it. But I'm not against it, but I'm not for it. And I'm going to make sure I'm eating really healthy foods. Mostly I would say at least 90% vegetarian, because I was a vegetarian for 14 years until my wife got sick from anemia. She couldn't figure out how to get the iron. So that's why we do that. But so everybody has to find their own way. But I think moderation. Some people don't realize that it's the food that's dragging them down and, making them sluggish, and they're not able to produce, the kind of energy that they want in their body.
Right. And I always felt I was not a smart kid. I was put into school really young. I didn't know how to read and write. So I was always behind, and so I kept my mouth shut and just paid attention. But I think that kind of gave me an advantage of learning to pay attention. And so I paid attention to those things in my life. Nobody said I should eat this way or that way. And I'm not telling anyone how to eat either, but I think you should pay attention to how you feel, and those intuition things I talk about all the time here about what is it telling you, or how do you feel when you eat something? Do you feel are you good or bad? Because everybody is different, right? You can't really say there's one thing. And I think I'd like to talk about your BrainTap kind of technology, the app and the stuff you've kind of come to in the lab, figuring out how this all helps people in their life deal with things that you're calling the stress brain and stuff like that, and how we can move out of that. Because I think you can talk about science all you want, but basically people just have to feel it. They have to try it and they have to feel like, wow, that feels really better to me.
Mhm. One of the things we found in the lab that let's talk about dementia for a moment. When we were doing our dementia study, which was a 6-week study in the pilot program, everyone was diagnosed with dementia. At the end of 6 weeks, they were taken off the dementia scale because they were all functioning within the realm of their age groups. And the biggest thing was we created 49% more neuroplasticity for them. That means their brain was reconnecting. And we also found that stress, we know this is true, stress can shrink the brain, a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for bringing our long-term memories back into short-term memory and our short-term memories into long-term memories. So the more stress we're under, the more the brain starts to dysregulate, because when you think a thought, like if I said, remember your favorite vacation, most people can remember that, or at least a favorite vacation. That actually is opening up and activating 8 or more places in the brain to get that information. Then it has to be reassembled. But if the two hemispheres, especially across the frontal lobe, the front part of the brain, if there's a mismatch there in alpha activity, which is the brainwave right below, even though I'm talking about our brain has all these different brainwaves happening all the time, if there's a mismatch there, the brain will literally stop trying to find that information, because if it's not delivered instantaneously, the brain is always trying to conserve energy. It actually shuts down that wiring. Yeah. So when I talk about 49% more neuroplastic change, it basically reconnected those dendrite connections back to the different regions of the brain that hold those memories. So people's focus, concentration, their restorative sleep improves because the brain has improved. And when we talk about stress, nobody can actually eliminate stress from somebody except for the person, because stress is something that happens through us, not always to us. So if we can take whatever the stressors are and build a greater capacity for that. And that's why we recommend, just as an example, 2:00 in the afternoon, every person on the planet is going to go through a biological stressor, because our temperature drops 2 degrees. That's because these bodies were designed to live and breathe and move on the Serengeti. Wherever you're at in the world, these bodies are still designed for that. So we're supposed to be sleeping underneath the tree with the zebras, not running around like the lions looking to conquer our next victim. We're supposed to be taking time to recover. So what we found was there's a certain session that we created through our algorithm that has the brain go through a very quick 20-minute session, but you get the same experience as a 3 or 4 hour nap. And the body recharges and actually reclaims over 80% of the energy you had in the morning. So now you have a new morning in the afternoon. And that's what most people don't realize, is they push through that by drinking coffee, tea, or eating chocolate, which is not the way to do it.
Yeah, I have always, between like around 3:00 in the afternoon, I just tend to like lay down on the couch or lay down on the bed, and I don't really sleep, but I can feel that my mind goes to this place for 15 or 20 minutes, and I wake up or come sit up, whatever, and feel like rejuvenated. And again, nobody told me to do that. I just felt like I need to lay down for a second. I need to close my eyes for a second here. And I've always said that about like naps. And I think you're kind of saying the same thing about the meditation. It's the same idea of you're just trying to give your brain a rest, because one of the things you talked about, and I think the TED Talk video I watched, was you were talking about how we wake up in this fight or flight stress brain mode when we set an alarm clock or something, or you pick up your device and you look at the news, you look at emails, and it's just like, bam, you're under pressure immediately, and it's like, how do we learn to change our activities to change that, because getting to living past 65, you have to change that, right?
Right. Yeah. So part of it is, think of each of these different brain states almost like different gears in a system. But if you don't have a way to shift those gears, you're going to be in trouble. Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan until they get hit. Yeah. And I think that's what happens to the nervous system. Everybody has a plan, but then something stressful happens. And if you don't know how to, like, you're smart enough, or you've learned through the years that at that time you need to sit down and relax, you'll get more work done. It's kind of like what Stephen Covey calls sharpening the saw. You've got to take that rest and recovery time so you can show up as your best self later. If not, you're going to have low energy, you're going to be irritable, angry, upset, and it's going to affect your relationships, number one. It's going to affect your health, number two, and then your life's going to spiral, because that's what we're calling the stress brain. We need to disengage that brain, and we have a natural propensity. That's why addictions are so big, is because our brain has a natural need to do that. But a lot of people will look outside themselves. And I like to tell people the world's greatest pharmacy is not in the corner. The world's greatest pharmacy is between your ears.
Yeah.
Your brain can release 30,000 different neurochemicals. So let's teach the brain to do it. And breathing is one good way too. A lot of people will use breathing exercises as they relax. There's a lot of really nice breathing. We have the breathing exercises on our BrainTap app, but also you can just practice breathing, like breathing into the mental count of 4, breathing out to the count of 8, actually exercises your nervous system and teaches you to offload that stress, because the stress builds up in our system. So we need to offload that so we can not have that interference in what we're doing during the day.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing. People have kind of a preconception about meditation, almost that it's a big deal, or it's some kind of hippie idea or something from way back and stuff, and finding the time for it and stuff is the real tough thing. But if you can find 20 minutes in the middle of your day or somewhere in there to allow yourself that, like an electric car, you have to plug in, right? You have to rejuvenate the battery. And it's kind of like, I think this perspective, not just even individuals, corporations, everybody should come to that perspective of like, we need to rethink how we function, because it's only going to make us more productive. Do you have any tips for people how they can find some time in that day? Have you come to any assumptions about finding time?
Well, what we do is we recommend first thing in the morning that you do something to stimulate. There's a brainwave that as we get older, it actually atrophies. It's called the SMR, sensory motor rhythm. And we call it digital coffee. So first thing in the morning, we recommend get up 10 minutes earlier, because if you do start doing breathing, reflection, relaxation, you're actually going to be more present throughout the day. And then at night, if you're not listening to BrainTap at night going to bed, you could put on like a 20-minute really relaxing music in the background that shuts off in 20 minutes, and just let that music kind of wash over you. And one thing is, you can't really do it wrong. There's a saying one of my mentors said earlier in my career was, anything worth doing well is worth doing terrible at first.
Yeah.
So, just like picking up the guitar for people, I'm sure you've known people through the years that want to be a guitar player, but they don't want to pick it up and be as good as you.
I'm still trying.
So it's like, you got to practice. You can't just, these people, like meditation. I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world, and we get to India a lot, and I get to measure even gurus. And, they're still practicing, a lot of them, to get into that, they call it samadhi, which is a really deep state of relaxation.
Well, and that's kind of what I understand meditation to be, is practice, right? I mean, at its most basic form is you're practicing one thing, you're practicing of being in the moment. And years ago, when I had hit 30, I had started changing my diet. I also started reading about Eastern kind of philosophies, not because anyone told me. Again, I just found that it was something I understood naturally or related to. And one of the things that we're talking about was even walking meditation, where wherever you are, learning to kind of bring yourself back to a moment, and understanding where you are and what's going around you, and reevaluating the stress that you're walking through in any moment can be helpful in those moments. It doesn't have to be ritualistic type scenario where everything is perfect and you're sitting down in the perfect room on the perfect cushion with the perfect lighting or something like that. You learn to do it in your life with what's going on, right?
Yes. And also you are going to think. A lot of people think that meditation is mindlessness. Like there's no mind.
Right.
That's the goal on the bigger picture, but while you have your everyday thoughts, that's the time to deal with them. And I always tell people there's a few simple things you can do when these thoughts come into your mind. If it's a good thought, you should step into it and reclaim that emotion. Remember those good thoughts. But if it's a negative thought or a negative experience that happened through the day, step out of that experience. Don't own it. It's just an experience. You don't have to relive it. You can put it behind you and learn from that experience. And if you start practicing just that while you're doing your meditation, pretty soon there'll be no longer any thoughts you have to think, because your brain will learn how to process them. But most people don't know how to process their day. They just let their thoughts come in and organize on their own. And that's like, never never, filing away all your things on your computer. It's a mess. Your desktop looks crazy if you never clean it up. The same thing's true with our conscious mind. And that's what the first phase of meditation. It's sad to me that only 5% of people who start meditating continue to meditate. And because they make it too hard. It doesn't have to be that hard.
I agree. I started something in the last few years, and this is going to sound funny or ridiculous at first, but my mantra was, I literally don't give a fuck, because it wasn't that I didn't care about anything. It was like, I'm not going to let the stress of everyday moments and all of this just crush me and consume me every day. I'm going to find pleasure and a way to live life and breathe and let this stuff go. And I think that was my way of learning to kind of come to those points meditatively in everyday life stress, and finding that little bit of peace in your day. And I think that's kind of what you're trying to do too with your
exactly. I think you're exactly right. I mean, one of my buddies, he said, he's a speaker as well. He says, you don't have any responsibility to believe what other people believe about you. And I think that's when Buddha said all unhappiness stems from unfavorable comparisons, I think that's the biggest downfall people have. Yeah. To be happy, you have to realize where you're at and find out what makes sense for you. And I mean, of course, we're kind of conditioned here in the US that if your neighbor gets a car, you got to get a better car. And if their grass is green, you got to make yours greener, and so we're always trying to keep up with the Joneses. And I think it's time that we just keep up with ourselves. That's part of meditation, is realizing you are enough right now. Yeah. And I think with your focus, I think that's true. People should not give a shit. They should be focused on the positive and eliminate the negative.
Yeah. Again, it's not about not caring about people. It's about not letting that stuff consume you. I want to talk about one more thing, though, here that I found really interesting about your science and kind of what you've come to, because it's another thing I always felt was happening in what I do. A couple different things. For one, I'm one of those people who sleep with a fan on because the noise there does something to my brain. And at first I thought I was weird, but then I found other people out there do that as well. And there's the fan people and there's the non-fan people. But I also felt like what I was doing when I would play a show and the crowd and the band would unite in this song and this energy, I always felt there's something really special going on there and something incredibly healing for us all. There's a reason people come out and sing along, and the rhythm and stuff. And I was seeing in your studies that you talk about that too, as far as, the tribal drums and music and how it's always been part of that aligning the brainwaves. Can you talk a little bit about that for us too?
Sure. Yeah. We are vibratory people or entities. So we vibrate and tune into people around us. So especially when we're singing a song or we like a piece of music, all of that is going to galvanize us on a physiological level. The other thing that we now know in science is that we are projecting light. Every person you meet is actually sharing their photic energy through something called infrared. There's actually clothing that our science officer designed for Tom Brady, which is called TB12. It's recovery clothing. And actually his infrared light goes back while he's sleeping and helps him to recover. Wow. So, but what they now know is that when you're in a group like that, and you're all doing the same thing, singing the same song, basically in the same brain state, and you're having a great time, you're actually sharing more information than just what's verbally available to you, or, what you're saying or hearing. There's an energy there. People want that. And that's why they're drawn to certain people. They actually did a study that showed people who are in a state of love and peace actually broadcast 200 times more light from their heart center as people who are in fear and depression. So, when the old saying used to be, hey, I'm light, or, they thought that was a hippie thing too. But now science is showing that epigenetically, the way our body shows up is actually 99% controlled by the amount of energy we have in our system that flows through our photic. We basically have little cells on every body, and every cell that's called chromophore, and it's like a battery. It absorbs energy. So we absorb the energy from our environment. We absorb it from people we're around. So when you're in that group, like the tribal thing that I was talking about, when everybody's in lockstep, going around that fire, and that fire is crackling and burning, they're actually syncing their brains up. And they're creating that unified field with everybody there. And that's why there's that kind of, hey, I'm going to follow these people. I'm going to go wherever they go. I'm going to do whatever they do. You kind of build that kind of birds of a feather kind of mentality, that flock together.
Yeah, you can see why people follow certain bands and music and stuff, because it is almost tribal in the same way. And that collective energy is something that your energy is connecting to. You also talked about like the ocean. That's another thing I find, like there's something about that sound of the waves at that frequency. And I know you've studied those frequencies kind of, and that's why I brought up the fan thing too, because it was up at that same kind of frequency sort of. And so not only is there a huge energy from the ocean, but that sound as well. It must be kind of really doing something to us, because people are drawn to the ocean.
Yeah, like your fan, when your fan's going, it actually is it's 60 hertz energy, but it has a 10 hertz response, which means the fan's on, you're actually creating an alpha frequency, which is where you meditate. So it's helping you to offload some of that stress. The ocean, any big body of water, has a resonant frequency also of 10 hertz. So if you thought about it, if we were together flying to the Earth on a spaceship, the Earth has a resonant frequency between 0.5 and 100. So depending upon where we're at, if we're by a volcano going off, it could be 100. There are dead spots on the planet that have very little energy. In fact, in the ocean, they have dead spots where there's no fish and things like that, because there's not any there. We all thrive on energy. So when we sit near the ocean, there's a science called frequency following response. So our body sits down and we're vibrating and we match that frequency. And most people, even if they're not sensitive or psychic or something, when they meet somebody, they'll know, hey, I get a good vibe off that person, or I don't get a good vibe off that person. That's because that's our tuning mechanism. And water is really important to us, right? We're 70% water,
Right.
And more people live by water than any other place on the planet. They
Right.
say that at least 90% of us live within driving distance of a body of water. And that's to keep us alive, really, because we need that water.
It's so true about the energy from people. When I was young and didn't understand any of this kind of, I always felt vibes from people before they said a word to me. I could feel like stuff about this person. This person is happy. This person is sad. They're not telling me the truth, and all these kinds of things that, again, because I didn't know, like reading and writing, I didn't fit in so much. I learned to pay attention to all those little cues. So when you talk about that as science, like you've studied it, you've registered the frequency, the energy people are giving off. I feel so great hearing that, because it makes me feel like I wasn't nuts all the time, feeling this energy that may have not been there. It really is there, is what you're saying.
Oh yeah, we all know people, what I called energy vampires. You meet them, you're on top of the world, and when you leave, you're dead tired, and they're walking out all energized because they suck the energy off you. And I always tell people, you got to find out who your friends are and who aren't, because if somebody's just draining you of energy, there's an infinite amount of energy, but some people, just wear on you. You got to go do something to wake your body up again. So, but if you find that person, like when they come to a concert and they're all energized, I know people that can't even sleep after they perform because they got that energy off the crowd. They're just vibrating. Absolutely. And that's part of the downfall, is if they don't know how to dysregulate after that, then they could turn towards some kind of drugs to come down.
No, it's really hard. It's a whole different schedule. You're awake and into the night, and you struggle getting up the next day to go drive to the next town because of that. You did get so high from the energy and your adrenaline, and everything was working together. And I tell that to young bands too when I talk to them. Like they say, like, what's the best thing you ever did or something, expecting like some award I won or some paycheck I got. But I tell them there's nothing better than the power chord you hit at midnight when you and the crowd are together as one thing. That is the best thing I found about what I do here. And I think that is a lot of what you're studying in the brain and what's going on with the energy of people. And I also talk to my crowd more and more these days about there's no divisiveness when we're together singing these songs. You turn on the news and you're on the right or you're on the left and this and that, and you're pulling apart. And when we're together in a room, nobody's thinking about that. It disappears. It's amazing.
Right. And when you think about singing and doing those kind of things, we're the only animal that does that. So here we are, when we look at these performances, and there's something we know we're connected. So we're always looking for our tribe. And once we find our tribe, that's why people will, like in your case, they'll wear band t-shirts, they'll put stickers on their car, they'll get tattoos with the names on it. I mean, they'll brand you, because they want to be a part of that energy. That's really what they're when certain people, they say certain people have certain charisma. Yeah. I think it's just the energy that they give off. People, leaders have that too, so entertainers have it, leaders have it, the right type of leaders. And I think that's really what we're trying to awaken in every person, because I think people, you're a leader in your own community, or you're a leader in your own home, you're a leader among your peers, whatever. You want to be, you don't always want to be a follower, you want to stand for something. And I think once you get your energy right, you can make better decisions, you can make those life choices, you can turn off the noise and turn on the internal resources that we have to recoup and recover. Because like you said, when you have all that energy, you got to do something with it, or you've got to ground that energy so you can sleep, or it's going to keep you awake. It's going to interfere with that deep rhythmic sleep that you need.
And I don't think maybe you can enlighten me, but I don't think you're born with just this or that energy necessarily. I really think that we're all kind of pure potential, is the way I've heard it put before, and it's up to your decision kind of what you're going to do with that, develop that charisma, positive energy, or not. You're going to be the vampire that sucks the energy out, but you've got to make that decision, right, internally.
Right. Well, they now know that that's actually true, because the Genome Project, which in 2003 came out and said, hey, we mapped the genome, we can change everybody's life because we know what genes are doing what. But then they found out that they only mapped 1%. Yeah. The 99% changes every 40 seconds. So it really depends on what we think, what we eat, what we read, who we hang out with, all of those things. So, and the nice thing is that anybody out there feels like they're stuck, you can change at any age. There's no requirement for you to grow old just because you're growing up. You can keep that youthful mind and that learning going and do those things. I mean, Wayne Dyer said it best. He said, never let an old person inhabit your body. And I believe that today, that's important for people to think that way, that there's always something to learn. There's always something to develop. There's always a reason for being. And as long as you have that, you'll have that vibrant kind of life that we all want. Yeah.
And it's funny because those old, kitschy kind of sayings, like young at heart kind of sayings, have been around forever. And we dismiss them as you don't really listen to them. But I always felt like things like that, these societal, collective knowledge sayings, always have that kind of deeper kind of truth somewhere in there about them. Hey, before we go, I want you to just kind of sum up for us about the BrainTap app and the units that you've made, and how they help people kind of get out of what you call this reactionary mind into intuitive, creative state, because that's really what I'm pushing to, is that people be creative. So tell us about what's going on with your stuff.
Yeah. And we have sessions just for creativity, because that's a big thing out there. We have one called Enter the Creativity Zone. So when you think about it, what it is it's a way to train the brain through light, sound, and vibration to get into an altered state where your body begins to harmonize. Your heart, when we talked about the heart earlier, your heart actually has 40,000 neutrino cells. So your heart actually controls the brain between your ears. But when you're meditating and relaxing, you're causing these two to communicate better. So what the BrainTap does, without you having to do anything, you basically press play on the app, whether you have the headset or not. You can actually do it with just your own headphones if you want. And typically, if you go to braintap.info, it's free. You can it's a 15-day app that doesn't cost anything. You don't have to put your credit card in or anything. You can go there and you can actually download one of my full books. It's called Thrive and Overdrive, which will explain the science and give you some more information. So if I piqued your interest at all, go there for free. If you don't do anything, it just expires. So it's not like it's going to ask you to put a credit card in or anything. Just put your name and your email. We'll set you up with the app. Use it. It's one of those things that you have to do it to really understand it. Yeah. But what I've done is I've simplified it, because, like I said, our average user does it 28 times a month. And we only have 1% of the people that use our app ever drop from it because they love it and they use it. So go out there, try it, see what you can do. And then if you want to upgrade it, you can upgrade it to the helmet, which is our light and sound setup. that you can at that time make that choice. But I think test it out first with the audio only and see if it's something you want to do. We have over 1,400 sessions, so we have something for everybody.
Yeah, I want to focus more on that myself. It seems so often that I think other people can relate to this, that your brain is kind of like fighting against you so often because it's in this kind of fear stress mode all the time, or very often, even when we are sitting around, it's kind of there dwelling and stuff. So I really think these practices are what we need to do something to kind of get ourselves balanced again. I think balance is the best word for it, between, like you say, your mind and body and everything together. It really has to be. And it sounds kind of like I say, people want to put frilly-frally, hippy-dippy, or whatever kind of words on it. But it, like you say, when you go to the supermarket, you see this articles everywhere now. We know, science knows that this is real stuff, and you can really help yourself live a more peaceful mind type life and healthier and everything else like that. So go to
BrainTap.info, and you can download the app for free. And then it'll step you through all the processes. There'll also be a link there to download the book, Thrive and Overdrive, so you can read about it, learn. And then if you want to move forward, there'll be ways to do that. But at least give it a shot and do it for the next 15 days and see how you respond. Most people, 90% of people will report back that they're sleeping better, sleeping deeper, getting more recovery at night.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for being with us today. I really appreciate you talking about the science of it while I talked about just like the basic street level of it, and I think it's great that they come together and are working together, and I love what you're doing. It makes so much sense to me. So thank you for joining us at Staring at the World today.
Yep. Thank you again for having me. This was great being here.
So that's it. Great interview with Dr. Porter. I'm just fascinated by the work he's doing, the stuff I felt all my life. So I really enjoyed that. Again, to everybody out there, please subscribe, rate, review, whatever you got to do for the podcast. We really appreciate you being here. I'm Kurt Newman, and we are Staring at the World.
Thanks for listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a podcast about creative innovation. Please be sure to download, subscribe, rate, and review, and keep listening wherever you get your podcasts.